Welcome, welcome, welcome to Wise Words Volume 2. So, we've got a hot topic on the subject. We'll get into the topic in a second, but I wanted you guys to just know who you're listening to. So let's go around the table and let's talk about who we have on the call. Tremaine, tell us who you are, what you're about, what you've done, and how you're going to add value to the conversation.
Well, I'll try my best to keep it short as possible. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tremaine Davis, currently working in higher education as a professional staff to first-generation college-going students, as well as a community, I like to say activist, and I look forward to just giving some positive but also critical input to this conversation.
Good stuff, good stuff. And Dr. Ashay.
Hi, I'm Antonisha Alameen Shavers, and I'm assistant professor in the Department of Africana Studies at San Diego State University. And I just want to be a part of the conversation. Hopefully I add something to it, something critical and something insightful.
Nice. And Jared.
Hi, I'm Jared Inez. I'm 31. I'm multiracial. My father is white Filipino. My mother is black. As far as education, I did my undergrad at San Diego State, and I have an MBA from the University of Southern California, and I currently work in commercial banking. So kind of bringing that perspective to the table of operating in corporate America.
Nice. So I got three SD State guys on the call. But you know, it's funny. I went to South Dakota State, and we call that the real SD State. But no, my name is Joseph Blackman. I consider myself a serial entrepreneur right now. I own my own business in the East Bay area. I dabble in real estate. I have a finance degree from South Dakota State, and I played football there on a full scholarship. And I like to be the Johnny on the spot, the guy that helps everybody out, because if you can help people get where they want to be, you'll automatically get to where you want to be in life. All right, so the topic at hand. So we're talking about Mark Cuban, right?
Right.
Mark Cuban goes on Inc. magazine. I subscribe to Inc. magazine. I like the magazine. I like the website. So he goes on there and he says that I'm prejudiced. I'm a bigot. It's stemming from the Don Sterling fallout. So let's hear everybody's sides on it. I want to start off with Tremaine. Tremaine, what do you feel about this?
Well, first, I just want to say that I think it is very applaudable for him to come out and be honest about, how he feels. And that takes a lot of courage, to come out on national and be like a public figure such as Mark Cuban, to express his insecurities and his concerns. Choice of words, however, not only when he said he was prejudiced and also he was a bigot, but then his concepts of what that means, his examples of what that means for him to say that if he sees a black kid walking towards him at night in a hoodie and he's crossing the street, and then the other example that he gave, if you saw a white man, bald head, tattoos on head and tattoos on arm, he's crossing back over. Those are some very extreme examples of his prejudice and his bigotry. And I think, although, like I said before, we ought to respect him for that because it allows us to have real conversation about it, we also have to be very critical of what that really means, and everything from his examples to why he chose those two extremes as an example.
Dr. Ashay, do you feel that everybody has some sense of prejudice in them?
Yes, actually, I do. But it's not their fault, actually. I believe that it's a part of American society. If you're born in America, you're going to basically fall in line and with the status quo, with the beliefs about African Americans, with the beliefs about white Americans. And in fact, there's many studies that show that people who take certain tests have implicit racial biases, and they are pro-white, anti-black. And so it's not, like I said, it's not their fault. You're not born with it, but if you're born in America, eventually you're socialized to have certain prejudice against various groups. So yes, I do.
Okay. So Jared, tell us how you felt about when you first heard the interview.
Well, I thought Mark Cuban's comments were very bold and spot on. And I think he made those comments because he's a bit worried that the media and maybe the NBA is becoming to any sort of comments that can be interpreted as being racist or prejudiced, because he himself is known to make very outlandish comments. So he probably never wants to find himself in the same situation that Donald Trump's in. As far as what he said about being prejudiced, I completely agree. I think prejudice means to prejudge. And so when we see somebody, we don't know anything about them, but already we're thinking about what's this person all about, what do they probably do, and that's just based on the life that we have lived and all of our experiences. And it's just natural. It's just a part of interpreting our environment. And since we don't know everything about that person, we are prejudging them.
Yeah, definitely. Tremaine, how much? Let's go through the day of Tremaine Davis. So, how much throughout the day do you feel that you prejudge someone, or a certain situation, or a certain group of people?
Or interpret.
Well, I think it all depends on what part of the day I'm at. You know, in my working environment, I'm definitely more critical about judging or, you know, going with that aspect. I'm gonna tell you where I judge people often at and where I'm very prejudiced at. I'm very prejudiced when I play basketball. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If I walk into the gym and I have next game and someone comes up to me and they say, "Hey man, can I run with you?" I'm judging them. I'm gonna look at them. If they have on like some Asics low top tennis shoes with some jean shorts, you're not running with them.
Yeah.
And that dude, but you know that's a fault that I have, because that dude can be like the best basketball player in the gym, but based off of what he has on, he doesn't have on the proper attire. I'm making an assumption off of him. You know what I mean? And so, I mean that's as far as where my judgment goes. I also judge folks in a sense. I pick up on certain things. We all have triggers. I have a lot of triggers. So if I'm talking to someone who happens to be let's say European American descent, and they tell me, well, I don't see color.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, okay, so what you're saying is that you don't see a big part of who I am. And I understand that's not what they mean, but they're trying to relate, but in a sense, by trying to relate, you can't take away who I am. You have to respect me in that moment, in that presence. So I think that's where my judgment comes into play at.
Okay, Jared, this is towards you. So you're a couple different races. You said you have some Orient descent, African American, and what was the other one?
Black, white, and Filipino.
Okay, black, white, Filipino. So, how do you feel when? Or answer it this way. So, do you see color, and then what do you think people see when they see you?
Well, I think you can't ever see color. When you see someone, you see what race they are. Like Tremaine said, you can't just divorce that from their whole personality or their essence. I mean, it's a part of them. So my view is, I think we're at a point in America where we do see color. We don't necessarily stereotype. Like the term I would use is we have certain archetypes for people. Like, you know, let's say there's a white guy. If he's wearing board shorts, you think, oh, it's a surfer type white guy. Or if he's, you know, wearing some skater stuff, you're saying, oh, it's a skater type white guy. So we put people in these certain boxes. And I think for black men, historically, there's only been like one box, right? Like, this is a stereotype about black men. That's how all black men are. But I think now there's a wide range of different kind of images for a black man, especially, you know, with the president being black. So I think what Mark Cuban was saying is when he sees someone like in a hoodie, which he kind of when he's appearing to be a thug, for him that image appearing, he thinks that that's something that could be dangerous. But I don't think he was saying that that's indicative of all black men, or he's afraid of all black men. Just kind of like, you know, black men that he considers to be like in the thug category. And he thinks.
Still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. That was
okay.
thought.
All right. So, Dr. O'Shea, Jared brought up a good I guess a good buzzword, and that's the hoodie. We know with the Trayvon Martin situation, that was a big push, and the signal of wearing the hoodie was widespread, and that was a support for Trayvon. Do you feel that helped out Trayvon's case, or that it hurt it?
In regards to what?
When Trayvon Martin when we're trying to persecute the killer of Trayvon Martin, did the push of everybody wearing the hoodie actually help out the situation or hurt it? Because if you bring the wrong representation into a legal situation, it can hurt your case more than it can help it. So
Right.
what are your thoughts on that? And I don't want to go into the Trayvon Martin case, but I just wanted
Right.
to kind of go off on that tangent.
Right. Well, I think that in regards to the political statement that many people across America was trying to make was that anybody can wear a hoodie and it doesn't mean that they are up to no good, so to speak, right? And
Uh-huh.
so I think that I don't believe that it hurt the case. I think that what hurt the case was the how they presented the evidence, who they chose to ignore, who was not seen as credible, things of that sort in the case. I think that hurt the case. And I also think that Trayvon Martin, it was more so about him being an African American person as opposed to just, the fact that they highlighted this hoodie. No. I don't believe that. I mean, even if we can look at the Jordan Davis case, we can see that this white man outright killed this black teenager. And he did not go to jail for killing this black teenager. He went to jail for the attempted murder of the other people in the car. So it was for me, it was simply about his blackness that really did not allow people to see clearly, during a trial. I think racism and racial biases racial biases, they can make people sort of not see things how they're supposed to be because of prejudgment. So they're looking at stereotypes and not seeing it as clearly as they possibly can. So that's what I think it was about. I think the hoodie is an excuse. Just like I think the pants sagging ordeal. People want to go to, they pull up their pants or they're sagging their pants, and this is why we see them as thugs. No, that's not why you see African American men as thugs. You've been seeing them as such for hundreds of years.
Nice. Tremaine, you have anything to chime in on that?
Well, I definitely agree with that, and I think we have to pay close attention to context clues. One thing that was very alarming for me was that Mark Cuban chose this example to talk about a black kid in a hoodie, and then his other example was so extreme from that.
Yeah.
If it really was a case about you feeling a certain kind of way when you see someone walking towards you, then why not say, if I see a white kid in a hoodie, I'm crossing back to the other street? Because historically, a white person in a hoodie doesn't equal terror. And I think that's where the issue comes in. And it goes back to what Jared was talking about as far as this one perception of the African American man in this country. And although things are slowly but surely changing, the overall perception is that, if most of my days, I'm in a shirt and tie. But the moment I'm in that same environment, and let's say I happen to walk into my office on my way to the gym and I have on a hoodie, there's a completely different look towards me and a different feel at me, and I'm the same person. But it's so it's like that has to be in there. You have to have that thought in your head to think like, because of attire that represents something else.
Right.
Definitely.
Can I chime in?
Go ahead.
I also wanted to add a point that Stephen A. Smith stated when he was arguing with Michael Eric Dyson. He said that on his way to work in his suit and tie, to his big time job that he has, he was walking behind a white woman and she grabbed her purse. And frankly, it didn't matter what he had on, right? She didn't have on a hoodie. He had on a suit and tie. And those ideas about his blackness remained. And I think that sometimes we miss that point.
Right.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. But to Tremaine's point, when I listened to Mark Cuban's interview, he spoke about the black kid on one side of the street and him having to cross over. But then how he put so much on what the white kid looked like with the tattoos and this and this and this and the bald head. Right. It's like, why is there so much disparity? Why can't it just be a thug-looking black kid and a thug-looking white kid?
Right.
And unfortunately, it's not that way. But I would say it goes down to culture as well, because a white kid in tattoos is probably some biker dude, and they can get a little rowdy. But the black kid, it's not really a certain stigma that goes along with that. It's just overall thug life. Mm-hmm. And I feel Mark was just trying to make that point that any black kid in any hoodie is a part of that whole thug movement. So he has to cross the street. Mm-hmm. With Mark Cuban being so, I guess, he always has these moments where he speaks his mind, which is nothing wrong with that, but he gets in trouble a lot with his mouth. Do you think that made this a little bit more lighter of a situation?
I don't think so. Myself, I think what made this situation a little bit lighter is that you have a lot of people who are still on the fence about the comments that Donald Sterling suggested.
Uh-huh.
You have a lot of people saying, "Well, I don't know if that technically is that the definition of racism because he didn't say the N word. It sounds like he was more jealous than anything." And so people are trying to find a avenue to go to where we can make sense of this. And then you have Mark Cuban come out and say, "Well, we all have prejudice. I have prejudice. Sometimes I'm a bigot." And it's like, there it is. That's what we needed. There it goes. So then you relate that to the whole situation with Donald Sterling.
Uh-huh.
And that's just looking at the tip of the iceberg. If we really look down at the entire iceberg, then we know that Donald Sterling and Mark Cuban have a great history with each other. Back in 2009, when these first comments were made about Donald Sterling, Mark Cuban was the first one to come out and say, "Well, Donald Sterling is my guy. I support Donald Sterling." And so, and it also goes into what Jared was saying a little bit earlier about, the issue of privacy as well. But that still doesn't make none of this right. And we still have to look at this as from a racial standpoint because it was very racially charged on both aspects, on the black kid in the hoodie and also the white guy with the bald head and the tattoos. Both of those were very racially charged.
That makes sense. Jared, do you think that his comments being so, I guess, outlandish, do you think that they will help or they will hurt his situation with his financial, I guess, background, or you think his shareholders will pull out?
Mark Cuban?
Yes.
No, I don't think. I mean, if anything, it's increasing his popularity. He's becoming even more relevant. What's interesting to me is just how this whole situation has just morphed into more than it initially started out in. And I think what's kind of peculiar, probably for a lot of people, is how much the media was 100% against Donald Sterling. There wasn't one prominent white person that was willing to come to his defense. And it really showed me like, wow, it's really, really unpopular right now to say anything racist. And it's almost like this perception of how non-racist people are isn't really mirroring reality. So if you're a racist person now, you're like, man, I better keep my comments to myself because, shoot, I can get fired from my job, lose this and that. So there's kind of this disconnect. And I think maybe that's what Stephen Smith was kind of talking about. Like, wait, let's bring things back and talk about what's really going on, because the way, it was seeming from like the NBA and the media, it's like we live in this kumbaya period where racism so is great, and if someone says something negative, then they're cast out into the great beyond.
Yeah, I would say we do have to walk on eggshells when it comes to race and sexual preference, and that kind of limits everybody from speaking their mind. It hamstrings everybody from being their true self because we all have our prejudices. We all have a certain slant that we see life in. Dr. Ashay, did you, with the sensitivity with the race, do you think that's helped or hurt your career being a black woman?
In regards to discussing race? Just
your success in it. Because a lot of people will say, hey, I hired a black guy today.
Great.
Or we have so-and-so, African Americans in our company. Do you think that you might have been helped by being African American?
No, I don't. I mean, okay, so San Diego State University is its faculty is predominantly white, but I don't believe that I got hired simply because I'm black. Okay, I think that I think it's sort of we look at that side of it and say, okay, well, she's a person of color, or he's a person of color, and so you had it easy, But what about all those other people that got a shoe in, and that's white? Why don't we ask that question?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Right. So I don't even like the framing of the question. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tremaine, you want to chime in on that?
Well, I would just let me ask this question,
Uh-huh.
and we can answer it or not. But I just want to pose this question: if President Obama had the same credentials as Jesse Jackson, would President Obama be president? And what I mean by that is, most of the time when we reach certain places, it's because we have to have so much more to offer. So, Jared being very successful in what he does, but I'm only calling Jared out because he talked about his educational background. He got his undergrad degree from one of the best state institutions in the country, and then he went to SC to get his master's degree from one of the best schools, period, in the world.
Yeah. So,
that's often is the ladder we have to climb to get somewhere, to even be looked at. We have to accede to that level. So when you talk about does race help you? No, it doesn't, because there's all these other things that add on to that you have to show and prove. Like, no, this person is XYZ. I mean, look at, I know we're jumping all over the place here, but if you look at the situation, what happened with Richard Sherman, and the comments he made in the Super Bowl, against my beloved Niners, but I won't go into that. As soon as someone said something that was negative about him, the next response that was supposed to be positive was they had to show his credentials. That's not true about him. He graduated top of his class. He went to Stanford, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So if there was someone who went to, let's say, to the University of Miami and, represent the U culture, would that response been the same way? Most likely not. So it doesn't help us. It's not just based off of because we're African American or whatever the case may be. Now, mind you, we live in California where we are in the days of Proposition 209 across the board, which means that race is not even considered. We don't even look at that.
Yeah.
So you better have your credentials together to even be considered to be in this race, regardless if you're trying to start from an entry level or moving up.
Right. And I also want to add to what he said. I totally agree. I mean, even with President Obama, with him having all his credentials, I mean, I hope that some of us know that he was still criticized and not criticized because of his political policies. He was criticized because of his race.
Bottom line.
You see what I'm saying? So I don't think that it helps us at all. I mean, I think that it helps us. Maybe if Tremaine walked into, a basketball court or something, somebody's going to assume that he knows how to play. And if I walk into the club, somebody's going to assume I know how to dance. That's the only thing I think that, we get the privilege of, if you want to call it a privilege.
Right.
Well, me personally, I went to school in South Dakota, and that's that's white. Everything's white. It's snow. It's white people. Everything's white. And I feel at times that and this is going to be posed as a question, that President Obama kind of kicked a sleeping dog that we call racism, meaning that racism it's always been present, but when he came into office, it kind of rattled it brought it to light. Jared, could you chime in on that if you agree or disagree?
Yeah. I actually make some comments going to the previous conversation. So I was able to go to USC to get my MBA because I got a scholarship, and the scholarship was for minorities, blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans. And there's a program that USC has to give full tuition scholarships to people in these groups because they're underrepresented in corporate America. So this was a program that, some forward-looking liberal person thought up, and now trying to realize what the purpose of the scholarship by, working my way up in corporate America and showing everyone around me that, yes, a black man can be just as smart, just as capable as anybody else. And so the person coming up behind me, hopefully won't be discriminated against. And these people, these white guys I'm working with will say, hey, I've actually worked with the guy who's black and he knows what he's talking about. So when I see the next black guy, I'm going to think, well, maybe he, is equally as capable. And so another thing, I heard a news story today about Google releasing their demographics, and right now it's 70% male, and I think there's maybe 3% blacks and Hispanics at Google. And it was Jesse Jackson who put pressure on them to release these statistics. He was saying, there's minorities are highly underrepresented in technology, and that's where the new economy is. And so in my mind, I'm thinking this is a great time to apply to Google getting a lot of
Exactly.
pressure
Yeah.
to get some noise in there. So,
So the color would
in
help.
that sense, I wouldn't say help. I would say it's just leveling the playing field just based on being historically discriminated against. I mean, it's all about just equal opportunity. So if it helps, it's helping to equalize things.
Hmm.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great perspective. I think that is an excellent perspective that that Jared just talked about. And another thing that sticks out to my mind is that here we are in 2014, and there's someone who has to carry the burden of being the example to show, like, hey, we're not all bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's we're making progression, but there's still a lot of things that we have to overcome. Still, we still have a lot of us people of color who are still first generation, college going students, first generation college graduates. So we have a ways to go. But I thought that was a very valid point that Jared just made.
Yeah, and I also want to add, I think that we also have to understand that, it's not like here recently that African Americans have been making, strides and beating the odds. We've had, since enslavement, we have had doctors and people with PhDs and people with owning their own businesses and people participate in politics and all these things historically, not just 2008 and on, like we've been doing this. And of course we know because we see people in the 60s and the 70s, but I'm talking about people in the 30s and 20s, people, African American writers and all these things. But those things did not stop the dominant group from it did not change their viewpoint on us. So my perspective is that these things are embedded in American culture from the very beginning, and that they need to be unlearned. And I don't think that just having examples of successful black men or successful black women or other people of color is going to do the trick. I really think that we need to start in our education system. I mean, I have college students that are of European descent or, white Americans that sit in my class and they tell me that they were told that enslaved Africans deserved what they received. Then they were told from their history teacher because they were slaves in Africa. And so this misconception about our identity and our humanity is widespread. So I just think that we have to understand that black people have, despite racism, despite oppression, have always beat the odds in some shape or form.
All right.
That's good. I like to pose another question to everybody. So with the education of our history, do you think a new, say, 10 years from now, we tell our 10-year-old sons or daughters, we tell them where they came from, how they were enslaved, how they were ripped out of their country, brought over to America just to work as slaves, and then how they didn't have rights, and then 60, 70, 80, 90 years later, they started to gain traction, got rights, were able to vote, and started to become on the level playing field. Do you think that will give them a progressive attitude or something of a oppressed attitude?
Well, let me say this first. I think that for the youth that's coming up, and if we want to learn from our past mistakes, then we have to start way before we were enslaved. We have to talk about when we started civilization. We have to talk about when we started education policies and science, and start there. Then go into this other aspect of the enslaved African, and then how we were able to get out of that situation and go from there. It's all about how we start our foundation, because if we continue to teach the same thing, then the same lessons and the same perceptions are always going to be there. But we have to start at a place to where it really speaks to the empowerment that's in everyone. And with that being said, it doesn't mean that we cut out the achievements and the accomplishments of what we already learned about, American history and so on and so forth. But we add something to that so that it brings more of a broader perspective for everyone to participate and everyone to feel confident that there is greatness within me. So therefore I can aspire to do great things.
Definitely. Dr. Ashay?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tremaine. I mean, I think that if we was to take the route to only start with enslavement, I think that It is problematic. But even when we discuss enslavement here in the United States, in the textbooks, we limit it to what, a chapter, maybe?
Half a chapter, yeah.
A
Maybe.
picture.
Right, a picture, like little ship with
Yeah.
everybody stuffed at the bottom. And so we're not even talking about the enslavement in the way that it should be discussed.
Yeah.
Enslavement lasted in this country for 244 years. That's longer than we have been free. Okay, so you have all this history that we're not discussing. I mean, you could discuss enslavement from an economic standpoint, how it has benefited America, how companies are still striving right now that have benefited from enslavement, how it created a racial hierarchy in which whites are on top and blacks are at the bottom, how that has, how that has an impact on our racial hierarchy today. You can talk about resistance. You can talk about so many things during enslavement other than, oh, we did this and now it's over, so we should be happy. That's just BS. So we're not even justifying the actual experience, because I think if we did, I think that African American children, teenagers would have a actual appreciation for what their ancestors went through in regards to how they made it through. So.
Yeah. Jared, you want to chime in?
I think when you talk about kids, let's say young African American kids, when they're thinking of history, I think they probably largely think about their parents, and they see what kind of lives their parents had and people around them, and that probably gives them a sense of what their life is going to be like. I remember being this volunteer at a inner city school in Los Angeles, and I was asking the kids what they want to be when they grow up, and a lot of them were saying things like they want to be a pizza man or a plumber, and no one said a doctor or a lawyer or an astronaut. And what really startled me was just how low these kids' expectations were, and it's just probably largely because of the world they see around them. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it is important for everyone to understand the history of African Americans in America, but I think that's not as important as the environment that kids grow up in. If they are in an adverse environment, they have opportunities and they can see those and they can visualize themselves doing different things. Because if all they see is either be a basketball player, a rapper, or a drug dealer, I mean, then we're not going to make enough progress soon enough.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad has a book on Amazon. It's called Blacks from a Biblical Perspective. And he'll get in front of the congregation for a couple weeks, and he'll tell the congregation that you were kings, you were royal priesthood. Back in Africa, we used to run things. We have the continent with the most natural resources. We got the diamonds. We got all the minerals. You are winners, and I feel like a message like that will help a young black kid say, "Man, I can hold my chest. I can pop my collar a little bit." Because that offsets what they're taught in the public schools and in the private schools about them just being enslaved, coming over on the banana boat and then being enslaved and then barely getting rights and finally getting rights. How do you think we can better get that message across of us actually being kings and priests back in Africa and running things instead of just the half a piece of a chapter that we get now?
Right.
Please, Doc, go ahead.
Go ahead, Doc.
I was just going to say that I think that we have to be critical of even that perspective. All of us did not come from kings and queens.
Right.
There was kings and queens in Africa, definitely. Civilizations, great kingdoms, small communities, small societies. People were, we came from farmers, we came from fishermen, we came from mothers and fathers, we came from people, business women, businessmen, and market women, like all these different types of people, so I think that we shouldn't just focus on the glory of Africa, but I do think that when we do talk about Africa, we have to be critical. When we do talk about enslavement, we need to be critical. And I think that enslavement is just not taught from a critical perspective, and I think that's the problem. I think that, a lot of people don't even know how it is to talk about enslavement from a critical perspective, to where it's not degrading. It doesn't have to be degrading. Like, you came from slaves. That's not what we're talking about. It's about the truth. It's about teaching the truth of American history, a part of history that conveniently has been squished into one paragraph, even though in that same textbook we are actually talking about that same time period, but not what has basically made America what it is today. So I think that's important. I mean, the fact that we built this country, for me, that's powerful. No one says that. No one admits that African Americans basically built this country on their backs. This country was taken from Native Americans and we built it on our backs, period. So I think that there's still room to really be critical of enslavement and not, I don't know. So I just wanted to put that out there because it seemed like it was like, people say it's not as important and then people say get over it. And I'm just kind of like, no, that's still an important part of American history.
Right. Do you think that if we stay on it and not get over it, that we'll still feel like, because when Black History Month comes around, they play the TV ads and they play the commercials and they play the black movies, and it always makes me look at the white person next to me and be like, man, why'd y'all do that to us? And it kind of fuels it brings back, it kind of picks at a scab. We definitely shouldn't just like quote unquote get over it, but I think there should come a time to where we say, hey, we got a black president. Where we got millionaires and billionaires. We can actually do this. We don't have to really worry about the past, because if you keep looking back at the past, that's what our future is going to look like.
I don't agree.
Okay.
But I think that's people usually say that if you don't, from a Africana studies perspective, we have this idea that you have to look back to know where you're going. But so for me, we need to look back and to understand history, period. Okay. So if we're okay with talking about the Holocaust, for example, why not talk about enslavement in this country? Because enslavement happened in this country. If we're okay with talking about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and all these individuals, then why not talk about the fact that they had slaves? Like we were there, and I think that we can get over it. I mean, there's anger, but I think that when we talk about it enough and actually are critical of it, there's less anger. When I'm in my classes and I'm discussing racism, I think that my students are angry at first. But when I let them know that this is not, the faults or this doesn't fall on the shoulders of individual white students. I tell my white students that you should not feel guilty for this. It was not your fault. But you have to understand what happened so you can understand why you're in the position that you're in currently in regards to white privilege. And you also have to understand that so that you can understand black disadvantage. All these things are a continuum. You cannot understand why Mark Cuban fears the black man so greatly if you don't understand enslavement. You don't understand what happened during enslavement and the ideas that were transmitted from that time period. So everything is connected, and going back to, looking back so you can know where you're going. If you don't understand enslavement, then you won't understand the significance or the historical significance or historical connection of mass incarceration currently happening. So these things are all connected.
Anybody want to chime in before I chime in?
Well, I think that is an excellent point. And in order for any kind of healing process to take place, we have to discuss the honesty of the situation. And, I think where we fought is that we have yet to honestly discuss the real great suffering of Africans who were enslaved in America. We have yet to really go into that. Roots is one perspective. And Roots is not a part of our generation. Roots was a part of a generation that was 2 generations before we came into play. Mm-hmm. So, and the other aspect, too, I thought Jared made an excellent point about what do we see in our day-to-day lives. And, understanding that history aspect coming from starting with family members. How many times do we have the chance to talk to our grandparents, about the things that they went through? I learned a great deal about my heritage and where my family first started just from talking to my grandmother one day about how did she come to California. And, I'm not going to make it a long story, but she told me a great deal about the struggle it took for her and why she left Hope, Arkansas to come to California. And for that, I felt so empowered to hear how my grandmother was pretty much a leader in that aspect of coming to California. And that is a part of me, and that makes me feel good about stepping into certain leadership positions. So, as a young person talking to my grandmother about that, I was empowered with that. And so it definitely, we have to look at to how are kids being communicated with, who are they communicating, and what is the message that's being communicated with our young folks. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with language, but it has a lot to do with actions. So, that all that goes into play with what Doc just got done talking about, and also what Jared was talking about to make this thing better for all of us.
Right. And I would add, it's important to remind everyone about slavery and the history of African Americans in America, because then you can say that's why we need certain programs to help people, right? Like when you look at, things like the unemployment rate for African Americans being twice that of everyone else, right? You can say, okay, well, don't just try to point a finger at these people. Think about everything that has happened, right? And you need to have some compassion, So I think when, let's say a white person watches 12 Years a Slave, they're probably coming out like, wow, okay, I affirmative action now, right? I have no problem with that anymore. After all that has happened, right? I get it.
Yeah. And like, it just goes back to just like having that open and honest dialogue. So, just going back to Mark Cuban's comments. After he said the comments, he then came back out and he apologized he apologized to the Trayvon Martin and the Martin family. But he also said, I still stand by what I said. Now, in that is where we have to critique that and say, this is why you shouldn't still have that same principle. Let's talk about that, because there's no real learning that's going to take place in here if we still have the same principle as to why you made that first racial comment in the first place. So, this is where those teachable moments comes into play, and it does take honest dialogue for those things to happen.
Right. What were you saying, Jared?
Well, see, this is kind of how my perspective kind of, differs from Train, and I think I don't know if it's helpful to try to defend looking like say a stereotypic thug look, right? Like trying to defend, so like, you know what, if somebody wants to dress like that, then they should be able to do that and not be judged. I'm thinking to myself, that's just not practical. Like I would rather see, like, rather than guys in Oakland with their pants down to their knees, I'd rather see them in suits. I mean, if in my ideal world, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think it is not in our power, black men, to control our image. I mean, that's something that we can control directly, by the things that we do every day, the way we present ourselves. So, I think we should focus on doing that rather than just say, hey, you know what? If I want to wear a hoodie or if I want to wear like a grill, I'll be able to do that and still be able to get a job or, be taken seriously. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
Right. Can I say?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc.
Okay. Well, I have to definitely, I don't agree with that, but I respect your opinion, and I hear this often, but I think that we focus so much on the small percentage of African American men who, have a dress code that, kind of is completely opposite of the standard that's currently in place, and so since we always, that's our go-to people, those people that sag their pants to their feet and they wear goatee. Honestly, the students on this campus at San Diego State, that's not how they represent themselves, and all the white male students, they're not in suits, right? That's just, they're walking around in their, some shorts or in a tank and just normal clothing for the day. And so I think that it's problematic for us to expect, young black men simply hanging out or just going through their day to day to be in a suit. That's just, to me, is just, why do we have that expectation of them? But the other thing is that black men on an average don't really dress like that, but there's still stereotypes on this very campus. I hear, several African-American male students who talk about how they're harassed by police. And it's less about their clothing and it's more about the ideas that are attached to their bodies that make people treat them a certain way. So I would just challenge you on that argument about, you want people in Oakland to be in suits. Yeah, if they're going to work, maybe, or if they're going to a particular type of
That's an
job.
that's an extreme example, but
I know, but we're having a discussion, so I'm just like, okay, what is
right,
that?
right. No, I mean, I agree with you. I'm in a fair world. You can dress however you want, and nobody would judge you. That's not the world we live in. And
Right.
so, because there's this, somewhat negative image of black men, you guys can dress. I guess that just means.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But the fair world that we don't live in is rooted in racism, and so I know that you understand that. I just
No, yeah.
and so that's great. But I think that a large group of people in this country do not understand that even the standard that is created, it comes from the dominant group, which are white America, which is white America. And that's even problematic. I mean, we're talking about dress right now, but we can even talk about, other aesthetic principles like your hair. The fact that black men have to cut their hair really low, or black women feel that they have to wear perms and they can't wear braids, and all these things that are very restrictive to our personal identity. That it's all of that stuff is problematic.
Right. I mean, I think it's great. Let's say we can just have a big huddle, right? And we say, all right, everybody listen up. Nobody can do anything that's going to perpetuate stereotypes, all right? It's not good for us, all right? Are we on the same page? Whenever, even if it's just a minority perpetuating stereotypes, when people see that, like, oh, see, right there. And that could be like the only black person they see for like years.
Yeah.
So, it's not fair, but that's just the hill that we have to climb.
Would you say, numbers wise, with it not being as many black people in America as white people, that each person holds more weight than a white person?
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
If you want to just do the numbers. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable living my life for a white person. And you talking about the stereotypes in preparation, we have to understand that the stereotypes were created first. They're created first. That means
so?
Yes, they are.
Let's go deeper into that.
Okay, so what this means then is that the idea that the black man is aggressive, that stereotype is created first. Then it's morphed into basically current day he's a thug. And then the dress that black people take on, then that is associated with the black person, and then that becomes stigmatized, right? But the idea that the black man is aggressive, that idea is 100 years old. Like, that's old.
At least.
Right, at least, right? Yeah. So we have to understand that these ideas they're rooted in our society. So just no matter what the black man decides to wear, the so-called aggressive nature of his manhood will always be placed on him. That's why I gave the example of Stephen A. Smith. He gave that example himself. So why don't we start challenging, like Michael Eric Dyson said so eloquently, challenging our white brothers and sisters? We love them, right? They're Americans. We're Americans. We love them. We live here. Why don't we start challenging them on that, rather than saying, hey, black people, let's stop wearing this. Sisters, perm your hair. Brothers, pull your pants up. I gotta wear suits every day. Blah, 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 because otherwise they're going to think X, Y, and Z about us. No, they've been thinking of that forever. I mean, since the founder of this country, I would say. That's how it's been. Or name a time where when they did not think that way in the history of this country.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. But, I again would say, every time there's someone who's, let's say, is perpetuating a stereotype, like let's say perhaps there's someone who's abusing welfare, then there's going to be like some Republicans who say, see, right there, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So every time there's someone doing that, it's counterproductive. And so it's like we got to make sure that we're not doing ideally anything like that, so people couldn't just point the finger and say, look at that, look at that, look at that. Yeah. Because that's what people do. That's what they do. That's how Republicans think. They just find one example. To like bag on Republicans, but that's just like what they do.
But Jared, and I get what you're saying, but I'm trying to get you to understand my point is that that's unrealistic, and that would say that we are not humans. Right. Like black people are not perfect, and we're human beings, And so you're not going to, if black people, if there's this notion that black people are murderers or we're aggressive, and then you have, high murder rates. But at the same time, we're still human beings, and you can point to white people who do like, the one that just happened, but that doesn't challenge their humanity. And so why don't we think about that part? Like, wait a minute, how come y'all could basically do X, Y, and Z, but it's not a bad reflection on you all. But when we do it, it's evidence to show that there's something inferior about us. So it's just not realistic to say that all black people just need to not perpetuate the stereotypes, and then they will feel differently. And because I would argue they won't feel differently. They'll find something else to prove their preconceived notion about us because it's embedded in our society.
Yeah, to support their case.
Right.
I mean, there's always going to be people who are like, get it, and no matter what they see, they're going to think a certain way. But I mean, there's some people whose minds can be influenced. I mean, what's amazing to me is how many white people were like back for civil rights movement, how they risked their lives because they saw what was happening and they got to know black people like, this is a cause that I'm going to get down with. And that's because they saw genuine, black people who are upright citizens and like, yeah, this person is just like, you and me. And that's, I think Stephen A. Smith is still the right word of mine in that, we just need to, obviously, word of my body can't just be saints, but he was just saying that, we can't do anything that's shooting ourselves in the foot. That's what he was saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is, I mean, Tremaine, does that make sense? We kind of have to be perfect.
Yeah, that's always the argument, and I understand that perspective. I definitely disagree with that because it is such a massive load to carry.
Yeah.
I would love to see a picture of Stephen A. Smith when he was in college at his HBCU. I would love to see a picture of him, and I almost willing to bet my last penny that man was not in a shirt and tie. I bet you had on some cross colors. And it's so crazy because it's like, as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this, I just think back to myself when I was in college. I had no shirt that was smaller than a 5X tall tee. Not one shirt. And the same thing will go with my pants and my jeans. And, I didn't even know that I had a waist. I sagged so much in college. But yet I was a college student. I was a scholar in college. So why are we, why is that the focus? And, and I understand how people may have perceived me, but at the same time, I was more concerned about how I thought about myself. And I think where we have to go into is how do we build that esteem in ourselves? Because like what Doc was saying, no matter what we do, there is always going to be some people that are in power who have a structure, a system that can harm us in a way that's going to have some kind of perceived notion. But how do we keep that esteem in ourselves, and how do we go about making positive directions regardless of how we look? Because so I laugh all the time when someone sends me a picture of me in college because it's so funny to look at myself then and to see where I'm at now. And it's not to say that I don't wear tees and jeans now, because I do. It just fit a little bit better now because I'm 31 years old. But at that time, being young, a teenager, early 20s, I didn't care about that. And so we have to understand, we have to allow people that aspect of their lives to grow. And I think that's where we come into play at now, especially as mentors or as examples, because I look at myself and I see Jared as well as great examples, and if we happen to see a young brother, walking around and he has on a hoodie or whatever, I don't think we should approach him like, him, brother, here's a tie. But if we develop a relationship with that young man, then he can start to see like for himself, like, okay, in certain settings, this might be, another route that I want to take, because he's looking at our actions, and we can go from there. But there's value in all of our young people, and I think the biggest misconception that happens is that because you're black, number one, that takes away value from you, and then you dress a certain way, you have on hoodies or whatever the case may be, and it's like, oh, your value system is gone. No value. So therefore, you're a thug or whatever the case may be. Like, it's okay for me to say whatever I want to say about you to dehumanize you because of how you present yourself. And it's all in a shield of we all have a bias or we all have prejudice. And that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, question here. Tremaine, did you ever think once that it's okay for you to dress, with the 5X shirt, the 5X pants sagging? Did you ever think that was okay because you knew you were in college and going in the right direction?
No, it was just more about my culture at the time. You know what I mean? I was fully engulfed into my culture at the time. I was fully engulfed into my hip hop culture, and I also was fully engulfed into my Bay Area culture. Being from Northern California, being down in Southern California, I wanted to make sure that I represented the Northern California, and that was my way of representing Northern California at that time. And those were my main concerns about how I dressed. When I thought critically or had a conscience about my dress, it was more of those concerns. Moving forward, I just knew that I was definitely, in school to get a degree, and I wanted to take full advantage of that. And so I did. But at the time, I wanted to represent a certain way. I wanted to prove, in a sense, like it don't matter. It doesn't matter whatsoever. Like, I'm going to be here in this class. I'm going to be answering questions in class, and I'm going to go play basketball while I'm here as well. So it's like all these stereotypes you may have, like, you're going to have to throw them out the window when you're talking about me, because it doesn't matter. And so, that was my mindset going into it.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I would just add that, I think I agree with everyone in that it's unfair, the rules and the way the deck stacked against black men. I mean, you're just born American. There's like, what, a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance you're going to be in prison or on parole one day. I mean, it's incredibly, you talk about pressure that's on you. And so I think we should work to change the system. But in the meantime, that's still the system in play. So, I would agree with Stephen A. Smith when he was saying that there are minefields that I'm trying to tell you guys about. And, do all you can to avoid these minefields, because if you just do one wrong thing, right, you could just end up in prison. And so I think, it was obviously we can't be saints, but I do agree with you have to be mindful and know that things are not mindful. You have to be extra careful as a black man coming up in decisions you make, because you make one bad decision and you could be in jail, whether that be fair or unfair, right? And once you're in there, and you're probably going to be in the system forever. So do all you can to avoid going on that path. And if that means you have to monitor how you're dressing, then so be it.
Right. And I want to add to that. I definitely get it. I get what you're saying, and I've heard that argument, but I just want to say that that has to be at least done simultaneously. If we can agree, then black men have to, or black people, we need to do everything in our power, not to piss them off, I guess. And I'm being sarcastic because I don't agree with that. I'm a little different, but fine, let's just go with that. Then we still need people simultaneously challenging the system, because otherwise, how long will it go on? You see what I'm saying? So there was a time period where, in certain communities, or there's a time period where black men were being lynched left and right, particularly in the South, right? And so black parents, black community would raise up their children a particular way so that they would not sort of, get into these altercations with white people. They sort of try to warn them. So it was a sort of a understanding that you had to almost shuck and jive around these white folks, because they'll lynch you at the drop of a dime and nobody would do nothing about it. Right? But while we shucking and jiving, while we're going along with the status quo, who is going to stand up and say, yeah, but this still ain't right? And be vocal about it. That's the point I'm talking about. Because, Stephen A. Smith can get on national television and say, black men, pull your pants up, speak proper English so they can understand you, etc. But I also would like other people to be just as vocal and say, and as you're doing that, white people, you need to open up your mind. You need to stop judging people based on X, Y, and Z. You need to, unlearn these things that came from enslavement, it's like whatever, like we need that, otherwise it's like, well, how long are we gonna second job for them and be comfortable with it?
Yeah, I agree.
I thought it was very interesting, Stephen A. His approach, because he said a lot of things, that I think is valid, but his approach to how he said it was in a tone as if he is speaking down and not talking with, or talking to, I should say.
Right.
And we have to be very careful of that as well, regardless of how far I go in my career or in my education. At no point am I ever bigger than someone who does not have that. And if there's a way where I can communicate with a person to help them out, I'm going to take that approach. Then, pointing my finger and saying you need. And he's talked about the things that he's accomplished and how he wants people to look at his success versus the success of a LeBron James or a P. Diddy or a Jay-Z. And I understand that as well. But again, the approach is very critical, because it don't matter what we know. If our young people don't get a sense that we care, it don't matter. So it's like, well, how many young men are going to listen to Stephen A. Smith in that tone and that approach? Not too many. So we have to be careful of that, and we can't fall victim to believing that somehow I'm somewhat better because this is my situation and your situation is completely different, and oftentimes different means less than mine. We have to get out of that mindset as well. And out of all of what Mark Cuban said and then Stephen A., that was like my biggest issue. Like, here you're on TV, you are this African-American man on TV, and you take this position to talk to young black men. That was very detrimental, I find, very problematic.
Right. And I agree, because he was very angry. He wasn't coming from a place of like love, or I want to help these people. So it was like you're saying, it's like, man, pull your pants up, like and actually I've seen that sentiment before, and like I've even sometimes felt it myself. And I relate a story to you, Train, where in Oakland, the Jimmy Carter Foundation and Habitat for Humanity were building homes, low-income homes for people in East Oakland, and 4 black men robbed the volunteers. And this was like on all the news channels, right? And I was thinking to myself, like, really? Yeah. Man, like I'm angry at them for what they're doing. If I saw that, I wouldn't be like, man, brothers, why are you doing that? I would be angry. I'm like, you guys are counterproductive. You're making it harder for everybody. And, I think that's kind of like the spirit that Stephen A. Smith had. And I think it is counterproductive to have that vocally and publicly, because in a way, it kind of like you're saying, Train, divides black people, and that gives people who, may not be maybe prejudiced or bigoted, that gives them fuel. Like, look at them. See, they're blaming each other, right?
Exactly. It's like, you look back at the Bill Cosby pound cake speech, and what Stephen A. did was very parallel to that. And, and it's like, there's a lot of great things of what you're saying, but your approach is turning people the wrong way, and it's, we have to be careful about that. I think, sometimes we fall victim to our so-called success sometimes, and thinking that we're greater than what we really are. And we have to recognize that. And, all the stuff he was talking about, he accomplished. I was held back in the 4th grade, but I graduated from public school, went to HBCU. I get paid very handsomely, might I add. All these things. It's like, congratulations, fam. But at the same time, I bet you had a lot of people helping you along the way.
Yeah.
And but that wasn't communicated. It was what I did. I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and did this and did that. And so, we have to be very careful to that. And the other aspect is like, I don't even understand how he got on that topic to begin with. Like, like how did we jump to that? Like, how did we jump to that? Like, damn, so it's like this must have been built in for quite some time.
He was waiting for Mo to say something.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that's what we were talking about. I thought they asked you a question about Mark Cuban, but okay.
Okay, yeah.
But it goes back to that blame the victim,
exactly.
mentality.
Exactly.
It's you hear something about somebody in a hoodie. I mean, a hoodie? A hoodie is something that maybe some people use wrong, but most people use it because they're cold. Okay. Yeah. And it may be a fashion statement, but to automatically associate it with some something that's malicious. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's just crazy. And then he was like you said, Tremaine, he was ready to just start chastising these young men that he has in his mind. And I'm just like, how could you go there without speaking to the root of the issue? Now, there are some things that we can change, and we definitely have to take accountability, but I don't think that it goes to sagging your pants. I don't think that's the first thing we need to change. Right. I don't think that's the thing we should address in our communities, honestly. Right. I feel like that will happen naturally. If and it doesn't even have to happen. My thing is like, if you want to dress how you want to dress, but be brilliant, be fearless.
Right.
And respect one another. Like these things I care about. I don't, you can dress how you want to dress, but that's just my view. Yeah.
So maybe Stephen A. Smith was jealous growing up that all the guys, kind of like sagging their pants got all the girls, and he was, kind of more squarish, wasn't getting any girls. So now he's trying to, say, ha ha, look at me now.
Making up for lost time. Trying to make up for lost time.
Right. That was crazy. The other thing I had a problem with him is that he's talking about, like you were talking about, this idea of, his individualistic approach to, if I made it, you can make it.
Yeah.
And it sounds good in theory.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But for me, it really dismisses the real life impact of institutionalized racism. Okay?
Right.
Systemic racism. And, and I give this example, like this war example. He talks about minefields or whatever, so he kind of does that war thing too. But I have my own personal one. And one that I, made up. And so I say, if someone goes to war, and it's a real battle happening, and, most of the people in their squad or whatever it's called dies except them. And they come home and they say, Mama, I made it. Daddy, I made it through the war. And everybody's happy for them. And so would the public then say, well, dang, there must not be no war, because you made it. What happened to those other people? They must have tried hard enough. They didn't fight hard enough. Where was their guns? Where was their grenades? They didn't use them. So it's this idea that we focus on a Stephen A. Smith or maybe a Dr. Anthony Chalamet favors and say, well, they made it. So what are you talking about? There's no racism or Barack Obama. But it doesn't take away the fact that people are still in war or people are still dealing with racism. Does that make sense?
No, I totally agree. We need more ladders to success. And Stephen A. and Barack Obama may have climbed, the few ladders that were there, but what are all the people that were left behind, right? Where's their ladder to having a better life? Right. And you can easily just point to the example of people that did make it and say, see, if these other people would have worked hard enough, they could have made it too. But no. There's still only one or two ladders, right? If it wasn't Stephen A. Smith, it would be some other guy the guy that he was talking about, he beat out. It would have been him.
Right.
Thank you. And that goes back to my point about San Diego State, me being here. I don't think that race helped me. That there's been like 25 to 27 faculty members since the to 1960s. They haven't changed. It's from 1960s to now. There's always been between 25 and 27. Yeah. So, for me, I'm a replacement, and I have the credentials to be here, but I'm more of a replacement.
Yeah.
And you know what? My thought is embrace those opportunities. If someone is given an opportunity and they're just looking at it like, well, I got to fill a spot, then hey, however you got there, you got there. Then you go there, then you show improve. And make the person like, oh wow, shoot, this person was a lot better than I thought he or she would be.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. But I don't think I'm here just because I'm black. I think I'm here because.
I was the token in my school for sure. There was like three or four brothers and hundreds of white people, and we knew it. We were we were there. I'm like, okay, it's cool. Hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, yeah.
But you weren't there simply. Okay, so I would like to how do we reframe that question or even that idea? Like you were there because they let you in, because they was only going to let a certain amount of people in that looked like you. But what about the fact they let in so many white people? Like, what does that speak to then? Mm-hmm. Like I hear white people say, affirmative action takes my position. In their mind, that spot that was given to a person of color should have been theirs. And then in the same breath, you don't want to recognize privilege. It's just interesting, So I would just, like to see how can we do a reframing of that so we can really see the full picture. What really happened there?
See, I have no problem with like affirmative action policies. Let's say you had two candidates equal, in all aspects. One's black, one's white, and you got tons of white people. And, they say, okay, we're going to give the nod to the black person because we need some black folks in here. I mean, I'm totally fine with that. Hey, they've had 100-year head start, right? If we get a little leg up or we get the nod because of that, then that's great.
Right. But even the white people that were previously hired, their whiteness gave them the nod as well, and that's not talked about.
Right.
Not at all.
Yeah, exactly. It was just the status quo.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. Like we getting a nod this one time because you're being forced to give us a nod. But what about the fact that these individuals got the nod the whole time, and that's why it's a company that's predominantly white.
Right.
Like for example, know that the NFL, y'all probably know more about that, but I know that there's like some sort of like, what you would call that, a law. Please help me out, but some sort of rule that was passed.
They have to interview black coaches, right?
Yes.
Right, they have to interview at least one black coach. Now you don't got to hire him, but you got to interview him.
Right.
Right. But and as a result, we got the coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, from my understanding.
Right. Correct.
And so what that meant that they wasn't going to look at no black candidates without being forced to do it.
Right.
So I'm just so that means that these other people that were candidates and they were white men, they were getting the nod. The door was open. Walk through it. It's already open. You don't got to think about it. Not that they don't work hard, not that they don't have the credentials, but just being white and having all those credentials allowed that door to be open. But that policy had to be created so that door was open for that black man. And that's it's interesting.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at, and that's you keep using the word reframe, and I'm really trying to reframe that question. Do black people progress because some of the handouts? Me personally, I don't like handouts because handouts make you weak. It makes you rely on some fictitious system. But when I think of affirmative action, I mean that statement is weighted and doesn't really have a good connotation with it. But I think that, like Jared was saying, that if there's an opportunity to present it to a young African American, even though he's given the nod just because a company needs to have X amount of minorities, I think he should take it and be an opportunist. And then while he's taking it, I don't think he should look around and say, well, why are there still so many white people here? I still don't think that he should dwell on the fact that all the white people before him got the nod because they were white and that he just is there because he's black. But that's moving forward. I don't see any progress in that.
In the affirmative action.
No, in looking around and dwelling on why all the white people are there.
Well, you don't have to dwell on it, but it's kind of obvious that they are there. I wouldn't suggest that, but I just want us to reframe or start to reconceptualize how we understand, affirmative action. Affirmative action was created to take progressive steps in dismantling a system that has privied white individuals for so long. You see what I'm saying? So that was, but in doing that, then you're taking some power away from them, and so of course they are going to be upset about it, But I'm asking us to reframe or reconceptualize it. The idea of even handout. It's not a handout, but it's an opportunity. It's just something that should have already been done, and someone is being forced to do it, because if they're not being forced, they won't do it on their own.
Right.
Oftentimes.
It's not to say that the folks who are people of color who have benefited from affirmative action, that they didn't have the credentials to get to where they are. But before affirmative action, regardless of their credentials, they were just not looked at, period. And so now with that, with affirmative action, they now get a chance to be looked upon. But, what's very interesting about affirmative action is that affirmative action actually benefited white women more than it did any person of color.
Right. Right.
And that never gets talked about. It's always looked at as like, oh, this was something to help black people out. And it's like, okay, let's look at the numbers. Who did it really help out? So, and that's another aspect, but that goes along to what Doc was talking about, just looking at how everything is scaled. And so when you do walk into a room or you finally get that opportunity and you see it's only one or two or three of you there versus a sea of other people, you have to ask yourself like, well, wow, is this really beneficial? So there definitely needs to be some kind of reframing there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess it's just like you're saying, your mindset going in. Like, are you going in thinking, oh, man, I'm the token, and then you're all angry at everybody, or you're like, hey, I'm here. It's all good.
Right.
I'm going to be cool with all the white people around me, right? Maybe next year it'll be another black person.
Yeah.
So, I guess it's, your attitude and why you're there, even if you did get in because they had to, have a couple brothers in there or sisters.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's fine. But once you get there, and I'm not sure if you can speak to this, Jared, but I know other stories that once you get there, it's not all peaches and cream. Now you have an opportunity to make a living and make a living that's, connects to, your credentials, at the same level of your credentials. But it doesn't mean that everything is all hunky dory. You still have to deal with issues concerning race. I mean, I spoke to a black woman and she was saying that it has been difficult for her to advance because she has locks, and this is her natural hair growing out of her head, but it was okay if you could change your hair, then potentially you can get a raise or you can advance,
Well,
and
do
so
you think she should change her hair?
Do I think so? You asking me, do I think she should change her hair?
Yeah, if she really feels that her locks are holding her back, and I'll speak to that because when I graduated college, I cut my dreads. I had dreads coming down to the top of my back, and I knew that they would hurt my chances in finding a decent job when I got out. So I cut them. I mean, it's a stereotype. It's a negative connotation in the Bay Area. So I knew that that's the way I should go. I mean, who knows what it would have been like if I kept my dreads. I mean, I like having dreads. Those are cool. But I cut my locks because I felt like I'll be in better position to prosper. And
right, and that's your personal choice to do that. But my point was, and I don't want to get into my opinion. Y'all probably should already know it. But my point is that we're faced with that crossroads.
Yeah.
And for black people, for women, it's the same idea, but it's different for women because in this society, it's a standard for women to have long hair as opposed to men having short hair. So if you could have locks, it could have been a white man with a long ponytail. He could have been forced with the same situation of cutting his hair. So it's sort of different but similar. So yeah, but for a woman to have locks and they're long or whatever they are, I think that it's a little different because it's like, okay, well, this white woman has hair, it's growing out of her head and it is long. I have locks, it's growing out of my head and they're long, but why do I have to cut them off? Well, it's because my hair aesthetically do not fit the standard that's in place. So I would say no, I don't agree.
I would say that in corporate America, you got to, what people just say, play the game sometimes.
Yeah.
And whether that be you got to cut your dreads or, let's say I'm around all my older white coworkers and they're talking their Republican National Convention stuff. I can't just start, talking about, oh, I'm an Obama supporter. I got to bite my tongue at that point because it wouldn't be productive for my career to say anything. Right. But there may come a time where I get some more power and then I can start, voicing my opinions more. And I bet you most successful black people, we see prominent black people, there's probably a time at their career where they had to play the game. But once they get, some more money, some more power, that's when they can just start calling the shots and just start voicing their opinions. And now they're dictating.
I'm with you on that. Terrain, what are your thoughts on playing the game?
Well, here's the thing about playing the game is that yes, I think in a lot of structures, and that's not just in corporate America. That's also in the field of education as well. That's in the field of higher education or just education period that folks feel like we have to play the game sometimes. But recognizing this, while we're playing the game, there are massive casualties in playing the game, and we have to be very mindful of how we strategically play the game. You have to set it up to play checkers and not chess. And oftentimes we get caught up in playing the game to where we do things to where we're making checker moves instead of chess moves. And what I mean by that is if there is ever a position to where, you're with your colleagues who happen to be white and they're talking about certain things, and it could be, the Republican convention or whatever the case may be. If you are too quiet in that standpoint, then what does that say about you and your submission? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Versus, is there some aspect of how I can get into this conversation very, very delicately and just make a small point so that I keep my dignity in this matter and I move forward. This is small. I throw in something. This is a quick jab and I move out. I'm not trying to knock you out. Throwing in a quick jab and I'm moving out. And so we have to be very careful of that. I mean, I think when we talk about this, I think about someone like Colin Powell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the perception in our community about Colin Powell is that, oh, he's a Republican, so on and so forth. And then there's a lot of negative conversations that go along with that. But if you ever hear Colin Powell talk, there is a conscience with Colin Powell that resonates to our community. But because Colin Powell has been playing the game for so long, the casualty is that we no longer listen to that. So we have to be very careful in that mindset. You know what I mean? And it's, of course, it's things that we deal with all the time. In working in my environment, I have to be very cautious of the bass in my voice when I talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, I can't take away being 6'8".
Yeah.
Can't take away being dark skinned.
Yeah.
So something's gonna have to give here, and happy times have to be the bass of my voice, And so I understand that, but do I not sound like a man anymore? No, I'm still gonna, talk, but I have to be conscious of that perspective. You know what I mean? So these are the daily battles that we have to consciously think about that no one else is thinking about. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely real. Playing the game is definitely real, but we have to be careful that we're making strategic moves while we play the game. And that's not to throw a jab at you, Jeff, for that example that you put out there. But I just wanted to use that to say, we have to be careful in that mindset. We have to, because at the end of the day, it's us that's carrying this load. It's us that's carrying this. And if we don't have any kind of channels to release it or, to plant our foundation as to who we are, then that can come problematic as well, and that's what's called racial battle fatigue tends to set in, to where all of a sudden you don't know what's going on, but you're just so damn tired all the time. You don't have the energy to deal with this stuff, and that's when our job production starts slipping. And you all know what happens when job production starts to slip.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, Sam. At some point, you got to take a stand. And everyone has to decide, what their mark is, what they're willing to take. And it's just different. I mean, let's say you're a single mother and you're trying to, raise 3 kids. Well, you'll probably put up a lot of BS from your boss, because you're thinking, I got some mouths to feed. I don't got another job lined up. But let's say, you got some money saved up. One of your coworkers starts running off at the mouth. You're like, I'm not taking this. I'm out of here. Right.
Yeah.
So, it definitely varies from person to person, but I totally agree that at some point you have to maintain your own personal integrity.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Dr. Ashay, your last thoughts on playing the game?
Playing the game. I agree with the combination of what y'all have said already in regards to, you have to maintain your own integrity, and then sometimes it's difficult because you have to make personal sacrifices, and you may not be able to just say, hey, I'm not going to take this and I'm going to quit the job or whatnot because you have children or because you need to make a living, and that's just sort of the economic dependency that we have right now on this particular country. You know, we are dependent on those people in power, and those people in power are white, and they create a standard, and we have to live by it. But even with this standard that's created, we still need other people simultaneously fighting against it. I mean, it was at one point that we had to sit in the back of the bus. Now, I know people always go to that. It's kind of cliche, but we literally had to sit on the back of the bus. We had to enter the bus, pay in the front and enter in the back, right? But if nobody stood up for that, nobody challenged that, it was 4 black women that took that case to the Supreme Court. And that's the reason why we don't have to do that no more. Okay. So hopefully, you know, one day will come where, you know, my black sisters can wear their hair as they choose, as it grows out of their head. They don't feel the need that they have to go buy some hair to put on their head to make white people feel comfortable. I'm not comfortable with that notion. But, you know, fortunately, I'm not in corporate America, and I don't necessarily have to deal with that. Yeah. But, you know, I do respect people's individual experiences, but we need to speak about where they come from. Let's be honest about where they're coming from. And that's really racism.
Yeah, I think a good parallel to that is what you see happening with gay rights. And I think about all these people who are, I mean, I don't want to, you know, just get into a real touchy subject, but I think about, you know, all these people that say we're in the closet in their corporation, right? But now that things have progressed, they're at the point now like, hey, they're just all out in the open. But they have to wait until the right moment, until, you know, society changed. And now like, okay, now this is the moment where I can truly be who I am. But before, they're like, all right, I got to be strategic. I can't just come out, you know, doing all this stuff because people just aren't going to get it. So I'm sure that was incredibly hard for them to do, but that was just something that they felt was necessary.
Right. Yeah. And the change in society only comes from people really working to break down these barriers, you know, and it doesn't come from the conservative group, because the conservative group want to conserve what's happening. You know, it comes from people that are diligently working to challenge these ideas. So, yeah.
Very cool.
All right. Well, so we've been on this for hour and 26. This has been good stuff. I just want to get some last words, and in your last words, I want you guys to offer a semi-formal plan of how we can move forward from this Mark Cuban situation. What can our people do to get past this, and how we can eliminate it? So start off with Tremaine.
Well, I think the main thing what we can do is start to hold people accountable. We're now in this culture that if you say something and then someone says, you know, listen to what they said, they come back, well, you know what, I apologize, I didn't mean to say that. Yes, you did. You meant to say what you said.
Yeah.
We have to start holding people accountable in that and living in that truth so that we can learn from it. I don't think no one will learn anything from the situation if we just let it die down and let it stay from what it is. We have to raise that bar, hold him accountable for what he said so that we can move on and make things better. And it has to come from both sides. It can't just be from a black perspective. It has to be from all sides, because if it's hurting one community, then it's hurting all of our communities in the long run. And we have to really focus on that as well. So I would say we have to hold folks accountable.
All right, Dr. Usay.
I would say that, well, first of all, like I said earlier, I appreciate that Mark Cuban, you know, was honest and he, you know, said what he said. And, you know, from my view, I think that his sentiments are reflective of the majority of this society. Now, not just white America, but majority of this country has those ideas. So I think that it's time for us to really have real discussions about, you know, where do these ideas come from about African Americans specifically, because that's what we're talking about. But we also have negative views on other groups as well, which has a negative impact on how we treat them. You know, the fact is Trayvon Martin was simply walking to the store, minding his own business. That's a fact. Okay. And then another fact is he was killed. Okay. And the Zimmerman felt justified, and he felt justified because of the meanings attached to Trayvon's body that he has no control over. Okay, those are historical meanings that it's high time that it's time that we deal with those meanings and deconstruct them because they're really unwarranted. They really are. So I say that, everybody really needs to be challenged and we need to have a real discussion and probably need to start in the school system. And not just on Fox News or, NBC or whatever, even here. This is great, but this discussion needs to be taken to our children because our children, African American children, there are studies that show that they have kind of internalized these beliefs about African Americans being inferior to white Americans. So it's a problem. And if white America has internalized these ideas about Black people being inferior, that has an impact on hiring practices, that has an impact on policing, that has an impact on health care, and there's studies for all those things I mentioned to show that African Americans are treated discriminated against.
Right.
All right, Jared.
I would say this battle that we're fighting against discrimination and racism, it's fought on multiple fronts, and we need educators like the doctor and train educating people and raising the level of consciousness. And then we need other people, let's say like myself, who work in corporate America and understand the game and what it takes to kind of, inch your way into the middle class to express what I learned to people coming up. So they have some more tactics they know how to use. And I think what's most important is that there's just unity in that. And I bet you during the civil rights movement, everybody didn't agree on everything, but when they were public, it was unity, right? There was one message. And so I think that unity is important.
All right. Well, in closing, I just wanted to thank everybody for taking the call. Thanks to all the listeners who listened to this. Definitely share this message. With Tremaine, he shared about accountability. Got to hold people accountable for what they say. Dr. Ashay, you got to challenge them while they're young. Get in the school system. And Jared kind of echoed what Ashay said as well. Get them young, hold people accountable. And I just want to thank you three for being on the call. And signing out, over and out.